Hello and welcome to another edition of Stateside with Bob Koczera. I'm your host, State Representative Bob Koczera. I proudly represent the north end of New Bedford in the town of Acushnet. And the Stateside program is a program that basically wants to inform you about state programs and services that you might be able to avail yourself of, or you might just find interesting to know. On this edition of Stateside, we have the interim CEO of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, Steve Pike. And Steve, welcome to Stateside. We're glad to have you here with us in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I understand you said that you came from the other side of Boston, close to the New Hampshire line, so I apologize for the long reverse commute that you had today. Steve, why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and the agency that you head?
Sure. Well, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is a quasi-public agency that is supported by ratepayer funds. Those are folks that are in investor-owned utilities like National Grid or Eversource, pay a small amount each month on their utility bills that goes into a fund that then funds our activities, projects, and programs. It's a little different than a mainline state agency in that, as I mentioned, it's quasi-public, which means we have a board of directors. We're certainly in contact quite regularly, with the administration and in particular the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. But it is a little bit of a different animal than, for instance, the Department of Environmental Protection or Conservation and Recreation. As for myself, I just recently became interim CEO about a month ago, joined Mass CEC about 2.5 years ago as their general counsel. Prior to that, I had been a partner in a couple of law firms in Boston and had been a lawyer in the private sector for about 15 years. As we were discussing a bit before the show, my professional career actually started in state service 25 years ago with environmental affairs and the DEP. So to some extent, I've kind of come full circle from starting out in public service and perhaps not necessarily ending the career there, but at least taking a stop there along the way at this point.
It's nice to see that individuals feel a desire and a commitment to serve in public service, to serve the people, and certainly commend you for that. Serving in the public sector is a little bit different than in private enterprise. There's always the scrutiny and accountability.
Certainly.
And I know with respect to Mass Clean Energy Center, relatively new agency, established maybe about 6 years ago,
right.
But its focus is to somehow bring together the startups and to bring together the private sector to make those kinds of investments that really will benefit us in the future. And I say this with an eye towards the environment and what kind of environment we want to leave succeeding generations, and the need to get off fossil fuels and to other sources of energy. So there's a lot on the table to talk about in the short time that we have. With respect to New Bedford, I think that the Clean Energy Center has made its mark because of the Marine Commerce Terminal.
Indeed.
And that had a very important related benefit to your agency, in that we were looking to see what we could do to offer support for offshore wind energy. And I guess in the wisdom of the powers that be, they felt that your agency would be a good agency to undertake the supervision of this terminal, the construction of the terminal, and the eventual operation of it by a organization or a firm that would be able to service the offshore wind energy industry. And unfortunately, Cape Wind went south on us. We have pending, I think, some federal areas that have been auctioned off and that will be subject to offshore wind development. But having said all that, if you could just briefly, just expound a little bit on what the status of the Marine Commerce Terminal is at present, how what your agency's role is, what the objective is, which is basically to get it up and running and say, okay, we've done our job. But if you could comment on the Marine Commerce Terminal, I know that the viewers in the New Bedford area would be very interested in hearing about that.
Sure. Well, as you noted, we were tasked a few years ago with building the terminal for precisely the reason that you noted, was to assist in the deployment of offshore wind projects. At that point in time, the most immediate was the Cape Wind project, which does seem to be, shall we say, on hold.
Sure.
There are some opportunities perhaps in the future with the federal offshore wind leasing areas that are further south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And so we were tasked with constructing the terminal, which is at this point in time roughly 26 acres in the south terminal area of New Bedford, just north of the hurricane barrier. We certainly were tasked with getting that done in time for Cape Wind, which at the time was scheduled to begin at the end of last year, the beginning of this year. For all intents and purposes, the terminal was complete at that point in time. It was usable. There are still some ongoing, punch list items, but those items don't forgo, the use of the terminal.
A couple of years ago, I had taken a tour with some of my colleagues from the area and our state senator, and I was amazed. But what was so unique about this project was the fact that they had to construct it in such a way that it would be able to withstand great weight, and also large cranes that would be able to move the equipment off these freighters onto land and then to whatever other vessel would take them back out to sea for installation. And I was amazed by the bulkheading and the amount of engineering that went into this site. So clearly this is a long-term investment. I know they were talking about a 50-year life, but I think it'll be around for a long time and will have a very beneficial use in the port of New Bedford, and hopefully it will be there for the offshore wind industry once they get underway, and that maybe as long as 5 years from now. But I was just simply amazed. I don't think most people realize that this was a very unique bulkheading project to withstand that kind of weight for this industry. But I guess we're in a situation now where there's a little bit of interregnum, and I guess the case is what would be the best use for that at the present time, with the idea that eventually we want to be the place to be able to stage the construction of offshore wind turbines. So with that little sidetracking, if we could get back to so no doubt your agency is soliciting requests for proposals.
That's absolutely right. Yes, and just to touch on your comment regarding the engineering, it is one of the, if not the highest, what they refer to as highest capacity terminals in the United States. And by capacity, they mean the ability to bear very heavy loads. And it was designed that way specifically for offshore wind. Those components are extremely heavy, and as you note, the cranes that need to go right up to the edge of the bulkhead in order to pick those pieces up off of the ships are extremely heavy. And so the engineering is quite complex. The construction, needless to say, was complex as well. So what we did at the end of last year, at the end of 2014, was we issued a request for proposals. And what that RFP, as they're called, sought were proposals from the industry, in particular the terminal operator industry. Right. Proposals to actually operate the facility. At that point in time, it was a little unclear what might happen with Cape Wind, and so it was a relatively wide open request, assuming that perhaps there would be an offshore wind project there currently, and assuming that perhaps there wouldn't be. And so that that RFP was based on some work we had done the year prior with a request for information, where again we surveyed the industry. What are some of the questions they would have about the facility? What are the types of uses they would foresee for the facility? That sort of thing. We received at the end of March of this year 3 proposals, and have been working with those respondents to try to develop those proposals a bit more in order to provide the greatest benefit, certainly to the Commonwealth, clearly to the city of New Bedford, as well as to the whole South Coast region.
I take it we're not at liberty to go and disclose any of the array of proposed uses of the terminal. So in that respect, there'll be nothing newsworthy, but certainly keep the option open, with the idea being that the operator will be amenable to, should a offshore wind site want to go into construction, to go and say, well, we can accommodate your needs in terms of the manufactured parts that have to be shipped into the area and then eventually brought to the site that it's going to be erected on. So
that's absolutely right. Yeah. A baseline requirement of any agreement that we enter into will be that the facility will need to be available to deploy offshore wind projects should they materialize.
And just to pick a little bit around the edges, some of the things that you would be looking at, no doubt, would be what job opportunities would be provided to in the area, as well as what would be like the greatest economic benefit, as opposed to some operators that might come in and just casually let any boat come to the dock and unload. So I would assume that there's some criteria that will speak to the jobs issue and speak to the type of product or items that would be unloaded at the site, or the type of activity that may occur at the site.
No, that's absolutely correct. It's as you might imagine, different uses will produce a different number of jobs, both directly on site as well as ancillary. The terminal operators were very attracted by the prospect of offshore wind projects, generally because they do employ a fair number of folks. There is there is a lot of product coming in and off of ships and the off terminal facilities. So those are certainly key considerations in assessing the viability and desirability of any particular customer. What we have done in the interim is try to attract as many customers as we can to the facility. So in July, a company by the name of Gamesa, which is actually a wind product company, they've been leasing the facility since July, in storing, offloading and storing some onshore wind components for a project in the Plymouth area. So that is, I think that's an indication of the desirability of the facility, and some of the potential use of the facility. Those types of projects, onshore wind projects, probably in New England aren't going to be particularly plentiful, but we're in discussions currently with some other potential users, and hope to have a few more folks on site, and of course in the coming months.
The operator of the terminal will be responsible for making any additional capital expenditures, and also would be paying some fee back to the Commonwealth for the use of the terminal.
And those are exactly the discussions that we've been having and continue to have. It's as you could appreciate, it's a very complex set of issues, and it is a facility that's brand new. So folks are trying to figure out exactly what the best models might be for operating the terminal, and we continue to talk to a number of different parties that have different perspectives on what might be the best model. But certainly, one significant consideration for us is again not just the direct return to the Commonwealth in the form of, be it a lease payment or some sort of revenue share or something of that sort, or a tariff, similar to what Massport has. But also the ancillary, more indirect impacts on the city and the South Coast region.
Of course, your agency is really centered on alternative energy sources, and one thing that we notice in the whole South Coast area, and in particular in New Bedford, both the city aggressively erecting these solar panels on lots of land, including by the Waterworks property in the area of Freetown and Middleborough and Rochester, but also on residences on the roofs of their houses. And in particular, the residential solar program, I guess you would call it, is something very much under your agency's purview, and I thought maybe you might take some time to walk us through that, and maybe inform the public about how they might be able to participate if they so desire.
Sure. You're absolutely right. The solar program for us has been, and for the entire Commonwealth, has been a terrific success over particularly the last 5 or 6 years. It's been booming. The program as a whole is in a little bit of a transition due to its success, and it is a model of approaching programs that is very important to us, because it's providing us an opportunity to explore different ways of having kickstarted a particular industry, and then how you in one way of saying it, sort of gracefully,
yes,
and slowly exit the scene. So what we have been responsible for over the last few years are rebates to homeowners who have put panels on their houses, and that has, due to its success, it has become a program that has required a fair amount of money, and so that is an indication to us that perhaps the industry has been successfully kickstarted, and that maybe there are different ways for us to continue to provide incentives to homeowners to continue putting panels on the roof. So they have a number of different incentives. What we're now working on is a loan program. So moving from a rebate program to more of a loan program.
So what we're talking about is, like, I want solar panels on my house to cut down on my electricity bill. So the biggest obstacle I'm going to have is these solar panels cost money. They're expected to last 20 years or so. There's a useful life, but it's like a mortgage payment. So what you're talking about here is, instead of being able to go and say, okay, it's going to cost me $20,000 or whatever it's going to cost me to put the panels on, instead of getting a rebate, we might be able to work out things that makes it more affordable in terms of a loan, in terms of homeowners, in terms of mortgage payments that would be more more affordable to the homeowner. Maybe I'm simplifying it too much, but I mean, I think that I just want to get across that there's some cost to this. There's an awful lot of benefit. The immediate benefit to the homeowner in the so-called net metering policy of instead of paying and being charged for your electricity, you can now take whatever excess electricity you're generating from the panels, and it goes out the wires, and it's sold to the grid, and the company will reduce your, will actually pay you for whatever you're sending back to the grid. And of course, this brings pushback from the utilities. Not that it's
Indeed.
threatening them now, but it has the potential to threaten them a generation or two from now. But the overall importance is the fact that we need to lessen fossil fuels, because the gases that are being emitted into the atmosphere is causing climate change, whether you're a believer or a doubter. And you know, it's a good thing, because you hear about health issues and the importance of breathing clean air. I don't want to get too philosophical, but there's a benefit to these programs. And I also understand that there are what's called clean heating and cooling rebates that handled by your agency. I know nothing about this, so whatever you like to go and add to it, please feel free.
Sure. So these are programs that are similar to the solar rebate programs that we started out with, and so a couple of the more common types of what we refer to as clean heating and cooling technologies are ground source air pumps and air source heat pumps. And so what they do, one takes the natural temperatures from the air and basically converts them into temperatures into your house, and otherwise they take ground temperature and convert them into temperatures in your house. So it's a far more efficient way of heating or cooling your house than a typical, for instance, electrical heating system. It can even be more efficient than your air conditioning system. But again, there are costs to them. And these are relatively new technologies, so they tend to be a bit more costly than technologies you might see in your typical market. So we have rebates, again, just like for the solar panels.
Now this clean heating and cooling, is it to scale for individual homes, or is it more for larger buildings or office commercial buildings, or where would it naturally gravitate from? Because whatever the science is behind it, it seems very much involved. I'm just curious to know, where would the emphasis being put? I haven't heard too much about these clean heating and cooling, but basically they're pumps that filter the air, either indoors or outdoors, and serve as a type of air conditioner and as a type of heating.
Exactly. Yes. So they'll work both ways, and you're seeing more and more of them pop up. They really look like an air conditioning unit. They're typically on the outside of the house, and then they pump the air into the house, or they'll take the air out of the house, depending on whether they're heating or cooling and the season. They certainly can be scaled for commercial use, and we see a lot of potential for commercial uses. What we're focused on right now are residential uses, and have approved a program just recently of $30 million over the next 5 years. We're running the very first stages of that program and have seen terrific uptake. Folks seem to be very, very interested. Which is terrific. But they are, I think, one area of the state where, in particular, they can be very helpful is quite frankly in this South Coast area and in Cape Cod, where you might have, in particular, more electrical heating, specifically in the winter.
Very true of Cape Cod.
Yeah.
So I've been told, which is a very prohibitive way to heat one's dwelling. But again, what we're looking to do is bridge technology, innovation, and mainstream it. And along that line, your agency has had some success with an intern program where you are able to work with students, graduates of programs that basically to slot them with companies and get some experience and possibly get hired in this area of clean energy, of the if you will, the way to go, the green route. Would you? We have about a few minutes left, so we can probably end on this. But if you can tell us a little bit about the internship program.
Absolutely. It's our workforce development programs are a foundational mission of ours. And so we have a number of different programs, but the internship program in particular is a program where we take students, and typically they're college students, and we match them with clean energy companies. One of the challenges that we hear from businesses all over the state is we need a trained workforce. We need folks who understand how to work within the industry. And so what we will do is pay for these interns. It's usually 1, 2, or 3 per company. Over the last 5 years or so, there have been approximately 1,400 interns placed at companies. We even have our own internship program at Mass CEC, yes, within the agency, where we have roughly typically 12 students for 6-month, 6-month stints. And the idea is the same with the private companies. You can have interns in the fall, spring, and summer. And so, I would encourage anybody that is looking to get into the industry to go to our website and apply for that program, and any companies in the area that might benefit from a little extra help should also, apply to that program.
I know that Bristol Community College has a lot of energy efficiency programs and certificates and technicians that they train and that they put out into the field. And I know of one young man who was out of work, went through the community college and received his degree, had some background. Anyway, he got hired by a local company that had been a signed company, but that were going into this installation of solar panels and other type of energy efficiency measures. Make a long story short, somewhat active with the Greater New Bedford Workforce Investment Board, the WIB board, and before each meeting they usually bring someone in to talk about their company or their job training and so forth. And they brought this young man in, and he spoke about the opportunity that he had by going to the community college and by being hired by this company, that he loves his work, gets a lot of satisfaction out of it. We have about 20 seconds left, so I'll use that time simply to go and thank you for making the trek down to New Bedford and go right by the office in Boston. I appreciate that. I want to commend Mass Clean Energy Center for the job that they do, and thank you again for being our guest here on Stateside. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the invitation.
Hi, I'm Tay Leone, and you're watching New Bedford Cable Network. Good for you.